What's going on, everyone? I'm Zach, your host of the Auxoro podcast, and I just wanted to tell you guys that you can follow us on Instagram at Auxoro for behind-the-scenes content, and we're also going to be posting some previews of guest episodes, so follow us on Instagram for that. Also, we now have a Patreon where you can support us financially if you would like. There's a $2 a month, $5 a month, and $10 a month option for Auxoro, and you get things like early releases, Patreon exclusive content. You can suggest content for certain episodes, and we now have that available on Patreon, so you can follow us on Instagram and hit us up on Patreon with the link in the podcast description. So enough of that bullshit. On to this week's topics of concern. It is a wider range of topics. I think that there was a lot that went on this week, especially in comedy. So a couple things that went on in comedy were the Dave Chappelle acceptance speech for the Mark Twain Prize Award for American Humor, and also the Ricky Gervais monologue at the Golden Globes. Oh, fuck. That kind of burned my tongue. Coffee sip. So if you haven't seen the Ricky Gervais monologue at the Golden Globes, I highly recommend that you check it out. I'll link it in the podcast description. But basically, Ricky Gervais has been hosting the Golden Globes for years now, I think since the early 2000s. And this is his fifth and last time. And he basically comes on stage, talks to Hollywood's elite, not just talks to Hollywood's elite, he fucking tears them a new asshole every time he comes on. And the Golden Globes committee keeps inviting him back, probably because the ratings are always so fucking high whenever he comes on. So he basically comes on, tears them apart. Some people don't take it so well. Some people take it well. Other people are kind of indifferent. You can tell because it's always hilarious to look at people's reactions in the crowd, and you can kind of tell who's more of the virtue signaling type, who's more of the, that was fucking funny and I don't give a shit who sees me laughing, and who's kind of, falling asleep and too old to pay attention. So I always love when they pan to the audience reaction for the Golden Globes. But I wanted to go through a couple of points that stood out to me from the Golden Globes, things that were especially poignant. So the first thing that stood out, he basically starts by saying, Ricky Gervais starts by saying in his monologue, to open things up, to open the floor up, he says, "I don't care anymore. I'm joking. I never cared," basically. And he's kind of talking about his hosting responsibility. I think he's half joking. He definitely cares about his performance. He cares about the art of comedy. But when he says, "I don't care anymore, I'm joking, I never cared," I think he's more talking about he doesn't give a shit about what people think of him. And I've always admired that about Ricky Gervais. No matter what he's doing, if he's performing stand-up, if he's at the Golden Globes, if he's, acting in his show Afterlife or The Office, he always seems like he's genuinely doing this to entertain himself and then as a byproduct bring happiness to other people. But when he was standing up there at the Golden Globes, you could tell that he just wanted to have a good time. He was like, "I'm going to fucking rip into these people. It's not a big deal. Like, everyone needs to relax. I'm talking to a bunch of millionaires that are not in touch with the real world as much as the average American. So let's all just relax, loosen our buttholes, and have a good time." And so he kind of starts out like that. And then he goes into a joke about Kevin Hart being fired from the Oscars for having offensive tweets, which is pretty ironic because, as he points out, he's had so many offensive tweets, even more offensive than Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart basically stepped down from the Oscars last year, if you're not familiar with it, because of a homophobic tweet maybe 8 years ago. I don't know, something about him beating the shit out of his kids with a dollhouse because if they were gay. Like, obviously a joke. He would never fucking go to Home Depot or something, or wherever you buy a dollhouse. He's not going to roll into Toys R Us and buy a dollhouse because his kid tells him he's gay and beat the shit out of him to prevent him from being gay. This it was obviously a joke, but the Oscars committee wanted him to apologize for what he did. He said he had already apologized and he's not going to do that. Then he ended up apologizing anyway and then stepped down. But back to Ricky Gervais, where he goes head to head with people on Twitter all the time. He calls out people for their hypocrisy. He's on Twitter to have fun, and he even jokes about it in his special Afterlife. He says being pissed off on Twitter is like walking into a town hall and seeing a flyer for guitar lessons, and then ripping off the phone number, ripping the flyer off the wall for the guitar lessons and screaming, I don't fucking want guitar lessons. Like, not everything on Twitter is for you. He's doing it for the entertainment. Twitter is free. He's just putting things out there, making fun of people. It's not something to take super seriously. So he kind of gives a, fuck you to the Oscars awards committee, saying, if I can host the Golden Globes, why can't Kevin Hart host the Oscars? It's kind of ridiculous. And actually, I believe the Oscars just announced that for the second year in a row, they're not going to have a host. They're not going to have a traditional host. Last year, I know they kind of did the joint hosting affair. And this year, they actually just announced that they're going to go with that once again. And, I don't blame them, because no one wants to host in this environment. The upside is that people talk about you for 2 weeks, and if you kill it, you maybe get a little bit more of a following. But then the downside is that you get canceled, whatever that means, on Twitter. You lose your job in Hollywood. No one wants to work with you. You're not free to make jokes. You're not free to talk about things like race or sexuality or millionaire assholes in Hollywood, or like domestic violence, like things that aren't funny in real life, but you can make jokes about them that are funny. Like the classic example, I don't remember who said this, one comedian, but he said that, rape is not funny. Obviously, rape is not funny, but there are jokes about rape that are funny, which is 100% true. And you should be allowed to joke about these things. And comedy is a space where you should be allowed to experiment and say what you think is funny. And the people will decide how successful you are. Basically, you're either funny or not. And you work on your craft. You work years and years to figure that out, until you get to a point where you can host an award show, if you get to that point, or you can perform in front of hundreds of people at once. But comics are just like anything else. They've been working their material for years and years in comedy clubs, in dive bars, playing 3-4 sets a night. A lot of them still do, to work up their set material for longer specials. Most of them do, but you're saying so many fucking jokes. Like, obviously you're going to say some things that are off color, and you should be allowed to say that. And so I think that the Hollywood elite environment doesn't allow for that, which is why no one wants to host the Oscars. It's just a lose-lose situation. You're putting your reputation on the line and your career on the line, and you can't even do your job, because there's so many things that you can't make fun of, that you're not supposed to make fun of, or else bang, like, you're gone. You're blacklisted, basically. Another thing that Ricky Gervais said, he says, remember, they're just jokes. We're all going to die soon, and there's no sequel. So again, kind of going back to that first point, like, I don't care anymore. We're all going to fucking die. At the end of the day, these are just jokes. It's not, there's nothing final about it. You either laugh or you don't. It's him looking for things to poke fun at that other people maybe are scared to poke fun of. And he, as a comedian, is trying to find those things that are kind of towing the line of edginess and dangerousness, and going after those and writing good jokes about them, which he does. It's one thing to just say controversial statements for the sake of being provocative. I don't think that's funny. If you're just saying things that are provocative for the sake of being provocative, that doesn't make you funny. And on the other side of the spectrum, if you don't think that anything is funny, basically, you're not allowed to make fun of anything. Obviously, that's not funny either. But I think Ricky Gervais is so good at going after those, the the danger. The danger and the topics that no one wants to address, that people are afraid to talk about in the open environment because they may lose their job or something. But he's so fucking big and he's so funny. He's not really immersed in the Hollywood culture, obviously, because he basically just comes in and shits on people, and he loves it. And yeah, they're just jokes. We're gonna die soon. There is no sequel. You might as well laugh and have a good fucking time. One joke that really stood out to me. He introduces Sandra Bullock, and she starred in the movie Bird Box on Netflix. And he says, quote, "Our next presenter starred in Netflix's Bird Box, a movie where people survive by acting like they don't see a thing, sort of like working for Harvey Weinstein." And it's a hilarious joke, but people in the crowd kind of had mixed feelings about it. Understandably, I think he knew that going into it. But then he comes back at the crowd and he's like, "No, you did it, not me. Like, you were the ones who fucking stayed silent about Harvey Weinstein, like just calling them out." And he does that a couple times, just like, "Shut the fuck up. You did it. You did this, not me." And I think that just added to the punchline for the joke. So yeah, I think his monologue did a lot, and it said a lot with jokes. And I don't want to paint him as this, this overarching, comedic god that's coming in and trying to preach to the people, because he doesn't seem like that. He's not like the preaching type comedian. I think he sees himself as the common man, even though he is super fucking rich now. For most of his life until 40, he was not famous. He talks about this in a lot of his work. Now he's worked his ass off and has made a lot of money doing what he's good at. But before that, he spent the majority of his life living like a normal guy. And I think he's so effective because he still sees himself like that. And he doesn't come off as someone who's preaching and saying, like, all you people in Hollywood, like, I'm better than you. Like, you need to level up to me. You need to, clean up your morals because you're all fucking pieces of shit. And you need to be like me. He points out that there are flaws in Hollywood, obviously, and that people do act shitty in Hollywood, but he doesn't do it like he's standing from an ivory tower. He's just like, dude, I'm a real dude. I'm a normal person. This is what everyone else sees. This is what everyone else is talking about, and they're afraid to say. So I'm just gonna fucking say it. And he had the balls to go in, and he's getting paid to do it too, which makes it a lot better. It's always good to, even if you go in and you say something or you do something and it doesn't go well, at least you're getting paid for your time, which, props to Ricky Gervais. Again, go check out the monologue. I didn't even watch the Golden Globes. I bet you 90% of the people, I have no idea on the stats, but I bet you 90% of the people that saw Ricky Gervais' monologue just saw it the day after on YouTube or on Twitter and didn't actually watch the Golden Globes because it's 3 hours long. Like, no one wants to watch that shit. And so yeah, go check it out on YouTube. I'll put the link in the description as well. Let's see. Next thing I wanted to, which is tied into the Ricky Gervais stuff, I want to talk about the PC culture and comedy. And I've seen a lot of people say, especially on Twitter, because I've been spending too much time on Twitter recently, but people say that you're not allowed to make jokes anymore about certain things. Like, you're not allowed to talk about this. You can't talk about that. And I don't think that's true. I think that, you're always allowed to make jokes. There are consequences to the jokes that you tell. I just think you have to be more careful now. Like, if you're going to tell a joke about, rape or transgender people or homosexuality, something that's just like edgy right now that no one wants to touch, I just think you have to be make sure it's even better. You have to make sure that it's more a rock solid joke than maybe your other jokes. Because if you miss, people are going to care more and they're going to rake you over the coals for missing at a joke like that. So you have to make sure that the joke you are telling, it's rock solid, and that it's also coming from a good place. I think the best comedians, when they, say you're talking about rape, they're not, the rape victim is not the one who's being made fun of in the joke. That they're joking about something that has to do with rape, or maybe making the rapist the punchline of the joke. But a really good joke. You even see this like in Dave Chappelle special Sticks and Stones. He jokes about like the whole the letters, like the LGBT, the alphabet crew. They're not they're in the joke, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, LGBT, they're in the joke. I don't know why I clarified it. I think everyone knows what LGBT means, but I guess if you're one of the two people that didn't, but yeah, those people are in the joke, but he's using the joke to make a better point. Like he's kind of he's not punching down at a minority group, he's punching up at a societal standard, while like something that people are supposedly not allowed to joke about, he's punching up at that standard of, fuck this, I can joke about it and still make it funny. I'm not making fun of the plight of transgender people. That's, or the plight of rape victims. It's about finding something that is humorous about the situation, no matter how sick or twisted it is, and using comedy to exploit that and point it out and kind of take people on this ride of saying like, look, like I know from the outside, these things seem disgusting or these things seem untouchable, but here's how I see it. Just like bear with me for a second and walk with me, and I'm going to show you how this is funny. And you have to be really good nowadays in order to do that, because if you fail, if your joke flops, there's a good chance your career will flop too. So I don't think that you can't make jokes about these things anymore. Obviously you can. Look at all the comedians out there, the good comedy specials that have come out this year, like all of Dave Chappelle's specials, Paper Tiger by Bill Burr, Ricky Gervais, Afterlife. Even Liza has a special where she kind of rails against feminists. I'm looking up her name real quick. Liza Scherzinger. She has a new special called Unveiled, and she kind of rails against the whole feminist culture and like calls people out for man hating and things like that. Like something that's not super popular at the moment. Like it's kind of edgy to rail against feminists because everyone's like, oh, like, let's get on board with feminism and everything that it stands for, which at its core is great. Women should have equal rights to men and equal opportunities. But then obviously you can see that feminists take that too far into man hating and anti-men and like all these other ideals that don't even have to do with feminism. And Eliza calls that out, and it's fucking funny. Like she nails it. And that's why she gets away with it, because the joke is good. So I think if you're going to do things like that, it always comes down to the joke. If you're a good comic, you can do it. If you're just saying things just to say it, you're not going to get away with it. What else? This is a pretty, like I said, pretty comic heavy episode. So this week, Dave Chappelle accepted the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. And every year, someone gets this award. I went on a binge watching spree of Mark Twain Prize award speeches, and usually they're all pretty good. I saw Will Ferrell's this week. That was pretty funny, where he drops the actual Mark Twain statue and then proceeds to joke about it. So it's always kind of like this cool thing to watch a comedian get an award for being funny, because you want to be you want to be funny as a comedian, but I don't know if all these people need the recognition that they are funny because they just want to like go out there and perform. So it's like they have to, they want to like be funny to kind of like detract from the attention that they're getting in like some, I guess, you know, some complex, like it's probably hard for them to stand on stage, I would imagine, and just accept an award and say like, yes, I am really funny. Like, thanks for this award. Ironically, Dave Chappelle kind of does that in his speech, which I think is funny. He does it ironically, like the whole "look at me" thing. But so he goes on stage and he's just smoking a cigarette, which is great because he smokes cigarettes in many of his specials, if not all of his specials. I think he had the Juul in one special, but he uses it. I think he uses it for timing too really well. Like he always has these pauses in his special where he says the punchline or a joke, or he waits for a split second and then he takes a huge rip of a cigarette and just kind of stands there and exhales, and he lets that space work for him. And it does work for him. He uses it really well to his advantage, and it's definitely become a centerpiece of his performances that he's gonna, you know, have a cigarette on stage. One thing that he talks about, or one of the things that he talks about, is he says, quote, "There's not an opinion in this country that's not represented in a comedy club by somebody." And that's pretty powerful, because he was talking about the art of comedy, talking about how, you know, no matter if you're on the left or on the right, if you're a social justice warrior, if you're racist, if you even mentions racism, no matter what point of view that you have in a comedy club, there's probably someone that is going to represent your point of view, because as long as we're living in a country with free speech, you're free to make fun of whatever you want. And that's true in comedy, and comedy is something that should be protected. It's something that if you can't joke about something, then people aren't going to be able to process it. And it kind of goes back to the whole, like the whole rape analogy thing. I know like rape is obviously one of the most brutal and dehumanizing acts that someone can go through, and I can't imagine what a rape victim has to process in the aftermath of that incident. But if you can make that person laugh about what they went to, something as disgusting and dehumanizing as rape, then I think that is a beautiful thing. If you have been through something that's terrible, or if you're part of a group that's marginalized, and you have a joke that makes that person, the victim or the marginalized person, laugh at their situation, I think that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing that when you can use humor to alleviate people's suffering. And I think that's why you have to protect comedy, because everyone has something to say. Everyone wants to have their voice heard, and people have different opinions. Not everyone's going to have the same sense of humor, but everyone who walks up on stage has something to say and just hopes that people listen. Like they hope that other people identify with what they're saying, and they see their opinion represented on stage. And that's what's so great about comedy, is that there's no limit to how many opinions you can have on a certain subject. The same subject of a joke, you can write 1,000 different jokes about it and come in it at 1,000 different ways, and take these little specific things about a situation or an event and just make it your own. Take a perspective that no one's really thinking of. Which reminds me, I mean, a good example of that, who was I listening to on the Conan podcast this morning? Conan O'Brien. I'm just gonna look it up real quick. Team Coco. But yeah, you guys should listen to the Conan O'Brien's new podcast, by the way, if you haven't. Conan Needs a Friend. It's absolutely hilarious. Let me just see here. Malcolm Gladwell. No. Zach Galifianakis, Tina Fey, David Letterman. All right, I'm just going to read off his guest list until I find it. Oh, yeah. Kumail Nanjiani. So Kumail Nanjiani, you might know him from Silicon Valley. He is, and I think he's of Indian descent, but he's a comedian. He's in Silicon Valley. He's acted in a bunch of stuff. And just as an example of something, one situation that you could see from a bunch of perspectives, he was talking about the movie Ferris Bueller. And Kumail said that obviously everyone who watches Ferris Bueller, most people are going to think that like, wow, Ferris Bueller, Matthew Broderick's character is such a cool dude. You know, he's everything that's right with America. You want to, you know, take risks, and, you know, it's good to quit school once in a while or cut class and do something fun. Like, you got to let loose and just do what you want. And Kumail said that he was watching that movie and you thought that Ferris Bueller was like a piece of shit, basically, that, you know, he didn't listen to his teachers, he didn't do his homework. And it was because Kumail came from a background that was super strict. He did a lot of work. He studied his ass off in school. And he said that watching Ferris Bueller made him hate the character of Ferris Bueller because he just flew in the face of everything from that. And he actually makes some pretty funny jokes about that. So yeah, not everyone has the same perspective, which is why comedy has to be protected. Dave Chappelle also mentions that the country is getting really tight and that he knows comedians that are racist. And he actually says that he appreciates the artistry with which they paint their racism. And he goes out to make the point. He says, like, you know, he doesn't, if he sees a comedian that's racist, he doesn't get in their face after show and call them out and just say, like, you're fucking racist, you shouldn't say that, like all this shit. He talks to them, even if he doesn't agree with them. You know, you at least get to understand where they're coming from. And even though he doesn't agree with what they're saying, he would fight for their right to say it. He wants the comedians, even that have garbage opinions like racism, to be able to go on stage and make racist jokes, because that is the power of comedy. It's the art form above the content. You protect the art form first, and then you let the content work itself out. Another great quote, this is actually from Miles Davis. He gives Miles Davis a shout out. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Sorry, but there are horns honking on the street, pretty loud. But yeah, so Dave Chappelle gives a quote from Miles Davis. And the quote is, quote, "It took me years to learn how to play like myself." And, you know, that just hit me like a ton of bricks, because right now I'm kind of going through struggle. I don't know if it'll ever be over, but especially in podcasting, it is a battle to be yourself. And every podcast, I hope that I get closer and closer to saying what I think and what I feel, not what other people think I should think or think I should feel. Early on, whenever you start a career or you start creating something, you have people that you look up to. You have people that inspire you. And it's just human nature to take what they have made and take what they've created and put it into your own work, which is great. Like I steal from the best podcasters on the planet ideas all the time and questions, like from Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan, Dave Rubin, like people that I listen to consistently. That's why sometimes I almost like take a break from listening to other people's podcasts. As much as I love podcasting, I want my podcast to be my own. I don't want it to just be an assimilation of other ideas that I've heard from other people and trying to copy certain vocal patterns. Like I want to be, I want to have, you know, the dissective questions that make Tim Ferriss so great, but I also want to be laid back like Joe Rogan too, and I just want to be myself. But I take little things from each person and I kind of create or become those people. And you don't want to become just those people. You want to use ideas and thoughts at the beginning that you are attracted to, but then you also want to create a space where you can just think of questions and think of ideas and sit on things for yourself, not because someone told you that, you know, you should think this way, or you heard someone else say it and you're saying it in a different way. You don't want to be a derivative of everything you've heard, but give yourself some time and give yourself some space to come up with original content and original ideas. And the quote, "It took me years to learn how to play like myself." Dave Chappelle goes back to that with comedy, and he says, "It took me years to learn how to be myself on stage." And you can, I mean, I'm not, obviously I'm not inside the mind of Dave Chappelle, but just watching his old stand-up, watching the Chappelle Show, his appearances on Late Night, all the way up until now, you can see his evolution. You can see how much more confident and how much more wisdom and experience he has now, and how much more comfortable he is being himself on stage and just being present. And it's almost like, I'm doing this for me, and if you don't want to listen to it, then I don't give a fuck, but this is fun for me. And I think that's really cool. Another thing that Dave Chappelle does is he gives a shout out to his mom, and he takes the time to say how important his mom was in his upbringing, which I think is really cool, because, you know, a lot of people, when they get an award, their parents will be in it, but I think he almost half the time of his speech, it was 8 minutes total, I think about 3 or 4 minutes was just dedicated to him talking about the impact that his mom had in his life. And he says his mom told him a few times when he was younger, quote, "Son, sometimes you have to be a lion so you can be the lamb you really are." She says, sometimes you have to be a lion, excuse me. Sometimes you have to be a lion so you can be the lamb you really are. And yeah, dude, like, great advice from Dave Chappelle's mom. He obviously would do anything to protect the art of comedy, which is why he thinks that anyone should be able to go up there and produce the content that they want and take the perspective that they want, because he fights so adamantly to do that himself. He's fierce on stage, and he's fierce when he goes toe to toe with people and talking about certain things, because he wants to be able to, at the end of the day, to just chill the fuck out and talk to people like human beings and relax. And so you can't have one without the other. You can't just go with the flow your entire life and expect to get where you want to go. You have to have something. You have to have the values that you are just not willing to budge on, that you will fight to the death on, that you will do anything for. And for Dave Chappelle, one of those things is the art of comedy. And you can just see it in his eyes when he's talking about it. He gets super serious, even more serious than he gets on stage. But you can just tell that, even if he doesn't agree with what you're saying, he will fight the fuck out of anybody for your right to say it and for his right to be able to express himself. Because it goes back to, again, everyone who says something in comedy just wants to be understood. No matter if you agree with them or not, they notice something and have something to say. If you notice something about society, you want something to say, and hopefully other people understand you. If not, you go back to the drawing board and do it again. I think, sorry, one more coffee sip. That was a lie. There'll probably be a few more. The last longer topic that I wanted to end on is Donald Hoffman's TED Talk on Do We See Reality as It Really Is? It's a TED Talk called Do We See Reality as It Really Is? And Donald Hoffman is on the Sam Harris podcast as well, talking about our perception of reality. And Donald Hoffman, just some background, he is a cognitive scientist and a popular science author, and he does a lot of talks, and he kind of talks about how our perspective of reality is not what we think it is. And so he talks about the relationship between brain activity and conscious experience. And I've been kind of going down the rabbit hole of consciousness with meditation and researching psychedelics. So I'm very interested in this at the moment. I think it's extremely interesting. So that's why I want to kind of tell you guys a bit more about it. So Donald Hoffman basically goes on to say, our brain constructs everything we see. It's not just a snapshot. So, as people previously thought, everything we're seeing, say like you see a water bottle on your desk right now, there's a blender bottle sitting right in front of me, tapping it right now. That is a snapshot of reality. When I close my eyes, there's still that same blender bottle standing right there that I saw before. And when I open my eyes, it's the same blender bottle. Donald Hoffman is arguing that no, our brain constructs or reconstructs rather what we need to see to survive. It's not that accuracy matters the most in evolution and natural selection. It's our brain reconstructing what we need to see in order for us to survive. So sometimes accuracy doesn't matter. And if that doesn't make sense, let me give you the example that he gives in a TED Talk, which is icons on a desktop. So basically, let's take the blender bottle example. So say you have an image of a blender bottle or a water bottle, whatever, on your desktop, and you want to drag it into the trash. You are seeing the desktop. That is the interface that you are using. And by you clicking and dragging it into the trash, you are getting rid of that item from your computer. Now, what's actually going on is in your computer, you don't need to know what's happening in order for you to do that. You just need to know, I have to click this icon on my desktop and drag it into the trash. But on your computer, there's a binary code, a bunch of ones and zeros that most people don't know what it means. I don't know what it means, but things are going on in the background that you don't understand that are always there, whether you see them or not. And then that determines what is there and what isn't. It's not, we see the desktop because it's an interface that we know how to interact with. It's something that allows us to be on the computer and not have to understand how a computer works. We do so many things in our lives without understanding how things actually work because we're interacting with an interface that allows us to do so. So he's basically saying, Donald Hoffman is saying that too much reality could actually hinder our brains. So for the purpose of evolution, for us to survive and replicate our DNA and reproduce with people and continue the bloodline, we don't need to see everything. Accuracy is not the number one concern of the human species surviving like people had thought it was in the past. Our evolutionary what's best for us evolutionarily is not seeing the whole picture. So we see what we need to see in order for us to interact with those objects in our environment. So, he's arguing in Apple, what we see isn't actually what's there. We're seeing and interacting with the icon of an apple, but what's actually there is so much more complicated and we don't fully understand it right now. But basically, like, we're shaped by these tricks and these hacks that keep us alive, like the desktop on a computer. It's basically a hack for us to interact with our environment. And it sounds totally crazy. And Donald Hoffman actually has a book out which kind of simplifies this whole thing. I haven't read it yet. I've heard a bunch of his talks and podcasts. It's on my list, but it's crazy because he argues that there's something deeper than space and time, that we've actually been operating on a derivative of something else. So basically, space and time is just what we see, and below that is another system that space and time is derived from. And so he argues that there's another what actual reality is so much more complex than we have the power to understand right now. And we don't see these complex systems because we don't need to survive. Our bodies have adapted to allow us to survive. We don't have to know everything about reality in order to move through this world. It's good that we have limitations. You know, it's good that we don't have to see everything in order to survive. What's actually there is not what we see, and that actually helps us. So I encourage you to go check out this TED Talk. I'll link that in the description as well. It sounds really crazy. He does a much better job of explaining it than I do, but it's definitely worth a listen. You know, there's a bunch of things that have been held as the scientific truth that have been disproven throughout history. And he argues that our perception of reality, the relationship between brain activity and conscious experience as we know it, is one of those things that will kind of fall away. What we, as we know it right now, just space and time will kind of fall away, and we'll be able to hopefully understand the full interface of how human beings work and what we're actually seeing. So the last two things I wanted to end on, obviously the Australian fires have been devastating to people in the regions and animals as well. Not just people, but the people, land, and animals have been there's been so much suffering. So much has been burnt down. 500 million animals are dead. It's over that at this point. Over 10 million people are still existing in levels of toxic smoke. There's over 12 million acres burned in Australia. I will be donating to an organization to help out with the Australian fires, and I will link some fire rescue services as well in Australia. So if you guys would like to help out, even anything as much as $1 or $5, you can give some money to the links in the podcast description. I'll put them in there. But yeah, it's been absolutely horrible to watch what's happening to Australia, to see the devastation that's happening to our to the planet and to that habitat, and the suffering of humans and animals, and everyone being displaced, even though it's far away from where I am in New York. Our world has never been more connected. So it's just shitty to see that happening to other human beings and other people across the planet. And, I can't really do much from here to help out, but I can give a little bit of money. So that's what I'm going to do. If you guys are able to do that too, that would be great. I'll put the links in the description, like I said. The last thing I wanted to end off on is a quote to leave you this. Leave you this, that makes sense. Leave you with this week to ponder. And that quote is, quote, "Impressing people is utterly different than being truly impressive," end quote. And that's by Ryan Holiday. Impressing people is utterly different than being truly impressive. All right, guys, I'll see you next time. That concludes the Auxoro chat number 2. Like I said in the beginning, you can follow us on Instagram for behind the scenes content and previews of our guest episodes. Hit us up on Patreon, DM us, email us, hit us up. Thank you for listening. I'll see you guys next week. Peace.